The sound of splintering wood cracked through the early morning calm like a rifle shot. I shot up from the breakfast table, toast still warm in my hand, heart pounding. Outside my window, the wind carried dust across the ranch, but it couldn't hide what I saw next. A man in a golf cart, wearing a smug grin and a red HOA polo shirt, stood proudly over the shattered remains of my ranch mailbox. The same custom cedar postbox I'd carved with my late husband, Michael, 20 years ago, gone. Its hand-burned engraving, the one that read Wellspring Ranch, Est, 1983, was crushed beneath tire tracks and shattered glass. He didn't even flinch when I stepped onto my porch. HOA Regulation 4.17, he said coldly. All mailboxes must be uniform. Yours was an eyesore. An eyesore. My hands clenched. That box wasn't just a mailbox. It was the last thing my husband ever made with me before cancer took him. That cedar was from a tree on our land. He sanded every inch with his bare hands. I still remembered the smell of sawdust and varnish, and the way we laughed when he got paint on his nose. And this man, this bureaucratic buzzard, destroyed it like it meant nothing. I told him, "You've made a grave mistake." He smirked, handed me a printed fine for $117, and said, "You can take it up with the board, but don't get your hopes up." He turned his back on me like I was just some cranky old woman. A nobody. But what he didn't know what none of them knew is that I'm not just any retiree with a few chickens and a porch swing. My name is Ruth Danner. I'm 63 years old, and I'm the senior postmaster of this entire rural district. For 27 years, I've overseen mail routes, audited regional delivery compliance, and even helped draft USPS enforcement protocols in the state. That mailbox wasn't just mine. It was federally registered property, and by destroying it, they didn't just disrespect my ranch, they violated federal law of felony. They had no idea what storm they just walked into. What started as one petty act of vandalism would unravel into a massive coordinated takedown of the most corrupt HOA leadership this county has ever seen. There would be arrests, federal charges, community upheaval, hidden crimes brought into the light, and it all started with a shattered mailbox. So buckle up, because you're about to witness what happens when a power-hungry HOA crosses the wrong woman, the woman who literally controls the mail route they depend on. And I promise you, every letter, every fine, every smug notice they ever mailed would come back to haunt them. Comment below where you're watching from, because petty HOA nightmares like this happen everywhere, and what happened next will absolutely blow your mind and prove that justice can prevail even against the most powerful bullies. My name is Ruth Danner. I'm 63 years old, a widow, and a proud daughter of 3 generations of postal workers. For nearly 3 decades, I've worked as a regional postmaster, managing mail operations across 3 counties in rural Texas. That's a lot of letters, a lot of regulations, and a lifetime of learning how to read people and policies like a map. People think postal work is just sorting letters and driving routes. They have no idea the kind of organization it takes to run distribution for over 200 miles of rural land. I know every federal code tied to mailboxes, delivery access, and tampering laws. I've trained inspectors, mentored route drivers, and enforced penalties when municipalities violated federal policy. But all of that fades when I think of Michael. He wasn't a postal worker. He was a carpenter. The best hands I ever knew. We met when I needed a fence fixed and ended up building a life together. This land, this ranch, this quiet piece of peace tucked between the hills and dust of Wellspring. After he passed 5 years ago, there were days I didn't think I'd hold it together. But I'd walk out to that old mailbox he built, run my fingers over the carved letters, and remember everything we made here. He poured his heart into it, into every joint, every nail. I swore I'd keep it standing as long as I had breath in my lungs. This land, Wellspring Ranch, wasn't just a retirement dream. It was Michael's legacy. He'd saved every penny, worked nights, just so we could own it free and clear. He built every gate, planted every rose. That mailbox was the finishing touch. One he said would greet the world the same way we greet guests, strong, honest, and proud. The land sits on 18 acres just outside the town boundary. But when the new subdivision expanded a few years back, the county voted to incorporate parts of our neighborhood into the Larkhaven HOA zone. I didn't even know I was suddenly under HOA governance until a flyer landed in my mailbox, the same one they just destroyed. At first, I didn't think much of it. Most of the rules were laughably suburban lawn height restrictions, seasonal wreath regulations, no rural implements visible from the street. I kept to myself, paid my taxes, minded my land, but the letters started coming. Warnings, citations, demands. First, it was the non-regulation wind chime Michael had made from old tools. Then it was the barn paint color, the rooster, even the hay bales. All visual disturbances, they said. I ignored most of it. They didn't scare me. Until they went after the mailbox. It wasn't just a notice that time. It was a strike. Team, 3 board members, armed with clipboards and smug grins, arrived in a golf cart like they were on patrol. They circled the post like vultures, muttering about aesthetic violations and mail route uniformity. I stood right there and told them it was federal property. They laughed. "I'm sure you think you know the rules," one of them said, brushing past me. "But this community has our own standards." They left that day without touching it. But a week later it was gone. They came in the early morning, knowing I'd be inside with the dogs. No knock, no warning. Just destruction, splintered wood, shattered glass. A gaping hole where my heart used to live. And they had the gall to find me for it. That morning, I walked out, stood by the broken mailbox, and made a vow. I wouldn't just rebuild it. I would bury them with paperwork. Because what they didn't know, what none of them understood, is that their so-called standards were legally meaningless when they tampered with federally protected property. Under Title 18, U.S. Code Section 1705, destruction of any mail receptacle approved by the United States Postal Service is a federal offense, punishable by fines or up to 3 years in prison. That's without even touching the trespassing, harassment, and regulatory violations they'd racked up. But I knew better than to file a complaint too soon. I had something they didn't single quotes t. Patience. Let them keep acting arrogant. Let them dig their own grave one violation at a time. Because what they didn't realize was that the woman they thought was just a grieving widow with a ranch and a stubborn streak was the one person in this entire region who controlled every mail route that served their fancy homes. I assigned the carriers. I verified the delivery compliance. I coordinated with the USPS legal team. And I'd watched quietly as their HOA board bent, ignored, and outright broke federal and municipal codes to enforce their own twisted rulebook. They thought I was alone, that I was outmatched, that they had no idea I had the law, the records, and an entire federal infrastructure on my side. But more importantly, I had Michael's memory, and I wasn't going to let these bullies wipe it away with a golf cart and a petty citation. What they broke wasn't just wood and nails. They broke the last promise I made to my husband, and I was going to make them pay for every single splinter. His name was Brent Caldwell, 54 years old, and the newly elected president of the Larkhaven HOA. He drove around in a silver golf cart with leather seats and a little golden president plaque bolted to the dashboard. Always wore the same smug uniform, crisp white polo shirt with the HOA logo over his heart, khaki slacks that looked ironed with military precision, and a Bluetooth headset he never seemed to be talking into but always kept on. He smelled like overpriced cologne and entitlement. Brent had once worked in corporate real estate. Not the honest kind that builds neighborhoods or helps first-time buyers. No, Brent specialized in flipping distressed properties squeezing desperate families, and skimming margins from renovation management fees. After the 2008 crash, his reputation got a little too messy for city clients, so he retreated here into HOA politics. He called it community stewardship. The rest of us just called it what it was, Control. Tan, with that frozen smile that never quite reached his eyes. Brent moved through the community like a sheriff in an old western, but without the charm. He didn't talk to neighbors. He talked down to them. And he saw my ranch as the last blemish in his carefully curated cul-de-sac empire. He never said it outright, but I knew the look in his eyes every time he passed my split-rail fence. Disgust. And greed. The first official contact came in the form of a friendly warning letter, printed on thick cream paper with gold trim. It informed me that my mailbox posed a safety hazard and visual dissonance in the neighborhood. They asked no, urged me to voluntarily comply by removing and replacing it with an approved standard issue box from Larkhaven Partners. I wrote back formally and firmly, cited USPS regulations, attached photographs of the mailboxes, original placement, showing it had stood safely and undisturbed for 20 years. I even included my credentials as postmaster and warned them that tampering with the box would violate federal law. Brent replied with a curt email, "We understand. You may believe you are exempt from HOA jurisdiction." Unfortunately, our bylaws were voted unanimously by current residents, and your refusal to comply will be viewed as an act of willful negligence. The pettiness escalated quickly after that. First came the official violation notices. Not just for the mailbox, but for absurd things like a garden hose left coiled improperly on the side yard, a windmill ornament being too reflective, my welcome mat saying howdy instead of welcome, chicken wire visible from the street during molting season. Each violation came with a $50 fine. Each fine came with a warning of escalating penalties. Brent's little board of hand-picked yes-men signed every letter with glee. I imagined them sitting around a granite-top table, sipping seltzer, laughing at the ranch woman's tantrums. I tried reason. I tried calm. I requested a formal meeting with the board to explain the legal standing of my mailbox, my property, and my jurisdiction as a federal employee. They gave me 7 minutes. Brent spent 6 of them checking his watch. He interrupted when I began reading Title 18 aloud. "This isn't a federal court, Mrs. Danner. This is a private community. And in private communities, we abide by our own rules." I asked him point blank, "Do you understand that destroying federally registered mail property is a felony?" He smiled. That awful, shallow smile. "I think you're confused. That box is on our land now. You were annexed into Larkhaven jurisdiction. It falls under our visual code, but not under your legal authority." He leaned in. "Let me give you some advice. Retire from playing cop. Be neighborly, or things will get inconvenient." And then he did something that still turns my stomach. He tapped the side of his temple. Not once, twice, then nodded to a man seated in the back, who held up his phone recording. They weren't just enforcing petty rules. They were building a case against me. I walked out of that meeting shaking with fury, but I didn't lose my cool. Not yet, because now I knew what I was dealing with. Brent wasn't just arrogant, he was strategic and dangerous. Every violation he issued, every recording, every passive-aggressive email was part of a calculated campaign. He wanted me to snap. He wanted me to appear unhinged, difficult, defiant, so he could use it all to file for forced compliance through civil court, possibly even move for an easement seizure. He didn't want my mailbox gone. He wanted my land. That was when I started documenting everything. I placed a motion-activated camera facing the road. I copied every email and stored them in triplicate offline, online, and in print. I began reaching out to neighbors who'd left the HOA under strange circumstances. There were more than a few. I even found the HOA's original charter application, something Brent never expected me to have access to, and flagged 3 inconsistencies that violated state-level filing laws. But the mailbox? That was his first bold move. His warning shot. His power play. He thought he was proving his dominance. He had no idea that in doing so, he'd just awakened a federal official with nothing left to lose, a legal Rolodex, and decades of experience navigating bureaucratic warfare. What Brent didn't realize yet was that I wasn't just collecting documents. I was building a case of my own, and unlike him, I knew how to deliver it with federal priority. The day after the mailbox was destroyed, I received a notice slipped illegally. I might add under my door, final warning, continued non-compliance with Larkhaven HOA standards will result in formal legal action. It was signed not only by Brent Caldwell, but stamped with the HOA's embossed seal like it was the Magna Carta. And under it, a bill, not just for the mailbox violation, for over $2,400 in cumulative fines, lawn maintenance, outbuilding color deviation, an unauthorized agricultural structure, my chicken coop, even a line item for unauthorized wildlife presence, referencing a photo of my border collie, Daisy, running through a field. That was only the beginning. Over the next 6 weeks, Brent and his cronies turned up the heat. They weren't just enforcing petty rules anymore. They were weaponizing bureaucracy. First, it was my utilities. One evening, I came home to find my water pressure had dropped to a trickle. A quick call to the utility company revealed someone from the Larkhaven Environmental Oversight Subcommittee had filed an emergency report claiming suspected septic overflow on my property. Complete fabrication, but it triggered an inspection and a mandatory shutdown until I paid for a private environmental report. Cost? $700. Days later, a white SUV rolled slowly past my property at 2 a.m. headlights off. Daisy barked like mad, and when I checked the camera feed the next morning, I recognized the driver, one of Brent's board members. That same night, someone zip-tied a for sale immediate auction sign to my front gate. It wasn't even real, just a printed sheet, but the message was clear. We can get rid of you. But it got worse. 3 weeks into the campaign, I received a notice from the State Department of Public Safety. Someone had anonymously submitted a tip alleging that I was stockpiling controlled substances in my barn. I had to permit a full inspection. Embarrassing. Violating. Pointless. They found nothing. Of course, but that didn't matter. The record was flagged, and Brent made sure word spread fast. Suddenly, neighbors wouldn't wave anymore. One woman, who used to trade garden tomatoes with me, crossed the street when she saw me coming. Rumors swirled. Someone even started a thread on the neighborhood Nextdoor page titled, "What's Really Going On at Wellspring Ranch?" They posted edited photos of me, snapshots from that board meeting, calling me unstable, obsessive, a threat to the neighborhood. I was being socially erased, cut off, isolated, painted as the paranoid old widow with a chip on her shoulder. But here's what Brent didn't understand about isolation. I've lived through worse. I lost my husband to cancer after 2 brutal years of treatment. I stood by as he wasted away in our bedroom, too weak to climb the stairs, and I was there when he took his last breath. That kind of silence teaches you how to survive. So I didn't snap. I documented every suspicious vehicle, every false report, every fine. I kept them all organized, time-stamped, indexed. But Brent wasn't done. He filed a civil complaint with the local zoning board, claiming my barn was unapproved expansion, and demanded its demolition. The barn that had stood for 30 years, visible from Google Earth since before Larkhaven even existed. He tried to backdate the HOA's elevation plans to show it as a violation. Fortunately, I had the original property survey, stamped and notarized. But it took me 2 weeks to get the hearing. And during that time, The HOA padlocked my front gate with a notice that read, "Premises subject to structural review, entry restricted." They claimed it was a safety protocol. In reality, it was a message. "We own you now." But even then, I wasn't broken. I was furious, and then came the final straw. One crisp October morning, I got a phone call from the regional USPS compliance office in Dallas, my own colleagues. They had received an official report questioning my fitness for duty. The allegations? Mental instability, hoarding, threatening behavior, possible early onset dementia. It was Brent. I knew it. He couldn't win with the HOA, so now he was trying to take my job, my livelihood, the only place left that still felt like mine. For the first time I cracked. I sat on the porch that evening, staring at the empty patch where the mailbox once stood, and I let the weight crush me. I cried, not little tears. Ugly, heaving sobs that shook the dogs and scared the birds from the eaves. Because this wasn't just about rules anymore. This was psychological warfare. He wasn't trying to make me follow the rules. He was trying to erase me, break me, gaslight me into giving up the land, the house, the last piece of Michael I had left. That night, I almost packed a bag. Almost called the real estate agent, but then I remembered something Michael once told me, just after his first surgery. "When someone's trying to bury you, Ruth, remember you're not being buried, you're being planted. Grow back. Meaner, louder, stronger." And that's exactly what I did. The very next day, I reached out to Tara Ingram, a former postal route inspector and now legal consultant. We had trained together 20 years ago in D.C. She owed me a favor, and she delivered. Together, we combed through every violation Brent had issued, cross-referenced every Larkhaven policy with municipal law, and highlighted over 50 distinct breaches of state and federal regulation, many of which constituted fraud, falsification of documents, and impersonation of public officers. I hired a tech security firm to audit my property's digital footprint. They uncovered unauthorized devices transmitting from a nearby HOA-owned lot, hidden cameras likely placed to surveil my ranch. Even more damning? An anonymous letter, postmarked without a return address, arrived at my office. Inside was a USB drive. On it, audio recordings hours worth. Brent, in meetings, bragging about his campaign to reclaim the outskirts, mocking residents, outlining plans to force holdouts to sell so he could propose a zoning pivot to build a private resort. And in one recording, he said verbatim, "Ruth Danner? She's just a stubborn old cow. She fold, or we'll find a way to make her disappear." That was it. The gloves were off. I filed a formal report with the USPS Office of the Inspector General. I contacted the county district attorney. I alerted the Postal Service's Legal Affairs Office, providing every shred of evidence from falsified HOA documents to audio files to my own work, performance reviews to refute the false claims about my fitness. Within days, an official investigation was launched. Brent Caldwell had poked the wrong bear. Because now the United States government was watching. The first domino fell not with a bang, but with a quiet knock. It was a Tuesday morning when I opened my door and found Edna Martinez, 71, a former Larkhaven resident who'd moved to a mobile home park 5 miles away after a mutual agreement with the HOA. She stood there clutching a small leather-bound notebook and a trembling cup of coffee. "I heard what they did to your mailbox," she said. Her voice was soft, but her eyes? "Steel, I think I can help you." Turns out Edna had kept records, meticulous ones, from her 8 years under Brent Caldwell's rule. She'd received similar treatment when she refused to convert her drought-resistant garden back to approved landscaping. Her fines had exceeded $5,000. Brent had targeted her during a board re-election campaign, allegedly fabricating reports of pest infestations and structural violations. She handed me her notebook. Inside were handwritten entries, copies of official letters, timestamps, even photos of Brent and his board members at closed-door gatherings with Larkhaven Property Holdings, Inc., a shady investment group I hadn't seen mentioned in any HOA materials. Edna wasn't alone. Over the next few days, more came forward. Jack Tran, a quiet man in his 40s who lived on the southern edge of Larkhaven, stopped by my gate one evening. He was an IT consultant and had recently upgraded his security system after receiving anonymous threats. He offered to go through the HOA's website backend, which was hosted on a publicly accessible subdomain. What he found shocked us both. Hidden behind encrypted pages was a document folder labeled LR Expansion Strategy. Inside, scanned blueprints, digital maps, and minutes from secret board meetings. Their goal? To force out the remaining non-compliant parcels, mine, a few others, and consolidate land for a proposed gated luxury lodge and airstrip retreat. Brent wasn't just running an HOA. He was orchestrating a full-on land grab under the pretense of neighborhood beautification. Even worse, Jack uncovered altered digital records, fines retroactively added, complaints fabricated, board votes forged. Some meetings had never occurred, but they were listed in minutes with unanimous approval. I began compiling everything. Every file, every screenshot. I reached out to Melissa Chang, a former HOA treasurer who had resigned under mysterious circumstances 3 years prior. She was reluctant at first, terrified, really, but when I showed her Edna's notebook and Jack's findings, her voice cracked. I knew something was off, she whispered. Brent paid everything in cash. No audits. He said we were too small to be noticed. Melissa provided the missing link, access to the original financial spreadsheets from her tenure. On her old laptop, still buried in her attic, were documents showing HOA dues being funneled into a separate account labeled Community Legacy Fund. That account wasn't tracked in the official ledger. Where did the money go? Straight to Larkhaven Property Holdings, Inc. Brent had set up a shell company under his wife's maiden name. He'd been using HOA dues to finance property studies, architectural renderings, and even bribe county officials for early rezoning conversations. This wasn't just corruption. This was a RICO-level conspiracy. By now, I had allies. Real ones, people with purpose. Edna, the meticulous archivist with nothing left to lose. Jack, the digital wizard with the receipts. Melissa, the numbers woman with access to damning ledgers. Tara, my old USPS colleague, connecting dots with federal oversight teams. Officer Glenn Bell, a part-time rancher and full-time sheriff's deputy, whose uncle had mysteriously lost his land to Larkhaven 5 years earlier. When he saw the files, he joined without hesitation. Together, we built the Larkhaven Truth Task Force. Met weekly in my barn, beneath hayloft lights and between rows of feed bags. What started with a few angry victims became a coalition of whistleblowers. 10, then 15. Then 23 residents, many of whom had never spoken out before. Brent had ruled with fear. But once people saw they weren't alone, that there were others just like them, something changed. They started speaking up, and we started fighting back. Using my postal connections, I filed multiple formal requests through the Freedom of Information Act FOIA for documentation. Brent never thought anyone would ask for zoning applications, land use modification drafts, financial audits. Tara forwarded them through internal compliance pathways, making sure the right flags were raised. Jack installed high-resolution, motion-activated trail cams facing all access points to my property and others Brent had targeted. We caught board members prowling late at night, planting garbage on porches, photographing children without permission, all of it time-stamped, dated, and federally admissible. Melissa created a master spreadsheet, color-coded and sortable listing every single violation, dollar paid, and fine issued across the HOA's history. Patterns emerged. The fines disproportionately targeted elderly, single women, and non-white residents. A clear bias. A clear abuse. Edna and I began working on personal testimonies. Emotional, raw, and heartbreaking accounts of people pushed out of their homes, humiliated, and broken. We weren't just compiling data, we were giving it a soul, and we kept everything triple backed up. USB drives, encrypted cloud folders, hard copies locked in a fireproof safe. Brent wasn't going to delete or rewrite history this time. Then came the breakthrough. Jack traced a deleted server file through DNS logs. It had once hosted an audio archive. He recovered a partial backup. What we found was a private strategy call recorded by accident. On it, Brent and two of his executives discussed neutralizing troublemakers before re-election season, creating strategic narratives for problematic residents, deliberate mail route manipulation to delay notices and eviction warnings, mail manipulation. My domain. I took that straight to the USPS, Office of the Inspector General. They opened a full-scale federal investigation, backed by everything we had gathered. We had finally turned the tide. The man who thought he controlled a kingdom had no idea that his empire was built on quicksand, and we were about to pull the rug out from under him. Because now I wasn't just Ruth Danner, grieving widow and rural rancher. I was the Postmaster General's most informed whistleblower, and I had an army at my side. It all came to a head at the Larkhaven Annual General Meeting, the one Brent had arrogantly titled Celebrating Community Progress on the glossy flyers he mailed out 2 weeks prior. What he didn't know was that we'd already forwarded copies of those same flyers to both the County Zoning Commission and the USPS, Office of Inspector General. The meeting, which was supposed to be another tightly controlled spectacle of HOA power, was about to become something else entirely. It took place in the Larkhaven Community Hall, an echoing, overly air-conditioned building with folding chairs, stale coffee, and a podium that looked like it belonged in a courtroom drama. Brent stood at the front, polished as ever, smiling like a man who hadn't a care in the world. His red HOA polo shirt was crisp, and his Bluetooth headset blinked steadily in his ear. His board flanked him 5 smug faces in pastel shirts, and identical smug expressions. The audience? Packed. Every chair filled, people lining the walls. Some neighbors I hadn't seen in months. Whispers had spread. Something was coming. You could feel it in the silence before it began. Brent tapped the mic. Welcome, everyone. This year has brought many challenges, but we've also made great strides toward elevating Larkhaven's image and safety. I'd like to open the floor to concerns in just a moment, but first, I'd like to speak. My voice cut through the room like thunder. He blinked. Mrs. Danner, this isn't a public forum. Actually, I said, stepping forward slowly, USB drive in hand. According to your bylaws, Article 3, Section 7, any dues paying resident may present documented grievances, provided they've submitted a request 72 hours in advance. I sent mine 5 days ago, certified mail. Murmurs rippled through the room. Brent hesitated, clearly caught. I walked to the front, plugged the drive into the projector port Jack had tested the night before, and turned to face the community. I thought I'd lost. Tonight, I'm not just here as a resident of Wellspring Ranch. I'm here as a federal postal officer, a victim of targeted harassment, and the voice for dozens of families who've suffered under this board's corrupt and illegal rule. The first slide flashed up. A spreadsheet. Thousands of rows. Every violation, every dollar, every resident targeted, color-coded by severity. Pattern linked to demographic data. Gasps. People leaned in. I heard someone whisper, "Is that real?" "It gets worse," I said. "Let's talk about where your HOA dues went." Click. Melissa's forensic audit appeared side-by-side bank accounts, one legit, one hidden, with transfers to Larkhaven. Property Holdings, Inc., a shell company linked to Brent's wife, Brent stepped forward, hands raised. Now hold on. This is clearly some personal vendetta. Then explain this, I snapped, clicking again. An audio clip played. Brent's voice, unmistakable. We just need to break them. Little fines, quiet pressure. They'll fold, and once that land opens up, resort funding is already lined up. Gasps turned to outrage. People were on their feet. Someone shouted, "You said that land was for conservation." Another, "You tried to evict my grandmother." Brent's calm was starting to crack. I don't recall saying that. It could have been edited. Then explain this. I said again, security footage. Brent's board members zip-tying a fake for sale, signed to my gate in the middle of the night. Another click. A still photo of the illegal surveillance. Camera hidden on the edge of my property. Another, a letter from the USPS Inspector General's office confirming the launch of a federal investigation. Brent's face went pale. He turned to his board. One of them was already backing toward the door. Enough of this circus, Brent barked. None of this is admissible. This is slander. Then the doors opened. 2 plainclothes officers stepped in. Behind them, Special Agent Alonzo Pierce, USPS Law Enforcement. He held up his badge. Brent Caldwell, you are under investigation for multiple violations of Title 18, obstruction of federal mail service, fraudulent financial practices, and criminal conspiracy to manipulate zoning designations. The room went still, and Brent, desperate, now snapped, "You don't know what you're talking about. These people are nobodies. You think anyone cares about some backwater widow and her chicken coop? I own this community." That's when it happened. An older man stood up, Mr. Klein, a retired veteran who'd lived here for 22 years. "You don't own anything." "We do." Another neighbor. "You fined me for putting up a wheelchair ramp." Another. "You made me dig up my wife's rose bush." One by one, the crowd rose, voices growing louder, angrier. "You stole our money. You lied to our faces. You destroyed her husband's memory." Brent turned, pleading now. "You people don't understand what I was building. This community was falling apart." "No," I said softly, stepping closer. "You tore it apart, and now we're putting it back together without you." The officers moved in. Brent tried to bolt, but 2 more deputies blocked the exit. They cuffed him on the spot. His Bluetooth headset fell to the floor with a dull clatter. Silence. Then cheering. Real thunderous applause. Neighbors hugged each other. A woman sobbed openly. Someone shouted, "Long live Wellspring." And someone else, "You go, Ruth." But I just stood there, heart thudding, staring at the screen as it dimmed. It was over. 20 years of memories. 1 destroyed mailbox. A reign of fear ended not with violence, but with evidence, with truth. The following morning, for the first time in over a year, I stood at the edge of my driveway and didn't feel watched. The birds were singing. Daisy, my border collie, raced across the open field, ears flopping. There was no drone buzzing overhead. No strange SUV creeping by. Just peace, and the sun rising over Wellspring Ranch like it was proud of us. Brent Caldwell was booked that night into county jail under 6 federal charges, including obstruction of postal duties, financial fraud, tampering with public records, and unlawful surveillance. 2 other board members were arrested within days, and subpoenas were issued to the entire HOA executive team. The news spread like wildfire. Our once insulated conflict made the front page of the regional paper. HOA president caught in zoning. Conspiracy, USPS investigation uncovers federal crimes. It was poetic. The very institution Brent tried to manipulate, the U.S. Postal Service, was what brought him down. The Larkhaven HOA was immediately dissolved by emergency vote. A special committee, comprised of longtime residents and independent legal counsel, was appointed to audit every financial transaction Brent had made over the past decade. The extent of the embezzlement was staggering, nearly $1.2 million in misappropriated dues, kickbacks, and private property deals. The courts froze Brent's assets. The shell company he funneled the HOA funds through Larkhaven Property Holdings, Inc. was dismantled. The land they acquired was returned to original owners or designated for public. Restoration. Melissa was instrumental in securing restitution funds for affected residents. Each household that had been fined, harassed, or driven out received compensation. Some were able to repurchase property they'd lost. Others simply came back to visit, weeping as they walked the streets of a neighborhood finally free from fear. And Emmy, the mailbox was rebuilt exactly as it once stood. Same wooden post. Same copper box with Michael's initials engraved near the bottom. But this time, it had a small plaque mounted beneath it. Here stood the first line of defense. In memory of Michael Danner. And the courage to deliver justice. We didn't stop there. Under the newly restructured Wellspring Community Council, neighbors gathered weekly not to enforce rules, but to rebuild trust. We launched a neighborhood garden program. Jack set up a community intranet where people could share photos, recipes, updates, no censorship, no fear. Edna became the de facto librarian of the Larkhaven archives, preserving every piece of evidence we'd used, every testimony, every spreadsheet. There was even talk of making a documentary. One night, we hosted a bonfire in the field behind my barn. Dozens of families came. We roasted marshmallows, played old country songs, and for the first time in years people laughed. Kids ran barefoot under string lights. Couples danced. And when the fire was just embers, we stood in a circle and made a promise. Never again. Never again would we stay silent. Never again would we let a neighbor suffer alone. Never again would we trade freedom for the illusion of order. As for me, I got promoted. My bravery during the investigation earned me an honorary commendation from the USPS Inspector General. They even offered me a desk job in D.C., but I turned it down. My work was here. In this soil, on this land. In every postmark I hand stamp. Every box I deliver. Because what Brent never understood was that a community isn't built by control. It's built by care. By showing up. By speaking out. By standing together when things get hard. I still walk the property every morning, coffee in hand, checking the fences. Sometimes I pause by the gate where Brent's fake for sale sign once hung. I smile. He tried to erase me. Instead, I became the story that saved us all. They say time heals all wounds, but I've learned that justice is what truly lets you breathe again. Standing here now, surrounded by a community reborn, I'm not just Ruth Danner, postmaster of a small rural route. I'm a reminder that even the smallest voice backed by truth, grit, and purpose can bring down giants. Brent Caldwell thought his titles, his money, his lies would protect him. He underestimated how deeply people care when they've had enough. I've learned that fear loses its power the moment you shine a light on it. That courage isn't loud, it's steady. It's sending that certified letter, making the call, sharing your story, even when your hands shake. This battle changed me. I no longer second-guess my gut. I no longer stay silent to keep the peace. And I'll never again underestimate the power of a documented truth in the hands of someone who refuses to be silenced. Brent will be in prison for a long time. His name will never grace another HOA letterhead again. And as for Wellspring, we're not just surviving, we're thriving. Together. But I know out there, in towns like ours, others are still fighting. So here's my message to you. If you're dealing with an HOA horror story, if you've been fined, harassed, isolated, or bullied, you are not alone. You are stronger than they know. And your truth, your evidence, your voice matters. Comment below and let me know about any HOA horror stories you've experienced. Your stories are incredibly important because they shine a light on injustice and empower others. And who knows, maybe your struggle, your triumph, could be the next incredible story I get to share with the world. Because even against the greatest odds, standing your ground can change everything. And if there's one thing this old ranch widow knows for sure, justice always delivers right on time. Like, share, and subscribe if you believe in standing up to bullies, no matter how official their letterhead looks. Your voice might be the one that saves a neighbor, a home, or an entire community. We delivered justice here, and we're just getting started.